Good morning, everybody. If you'd like to take your seats. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this session on AI in Action, African Success Stories, Transforming Industries, Economies and Societies. I'm Nima Elmi. I'm the VP of Strategy and Policy for Circle. I am also the co-founder of the Africa Dialogues, a thought leadership platform focused on emerging tech policies in Africa. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session, and it's a jam-packed session with lots of experts, and I'm excited about the robust discussion. First, I'd like to welcome onto the stage to provide us with opening remarks His Excellency Ibrahim Khalil Konate, apologies, Minister of Digital Transition and Digitization for Côte d'Ivoire. The minister is a seasoned professional. He has over 2 decades of experience in public administration, in energy, and in digital transformation. Before his ministerial appointment in 2023, he held leadership roles in national institutions in Côte d'Ivoire. He's also been an advocate for regional development, digital inclusion, and currently serves on the President's Regional Humble Council. Minister, if you want to come onto the stage for your remarks. Give him a warm welcome.
Bonjour tout le monde. I don't speak English. I'm going to speak in French, Bien, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier les organisateurs et me réjouir de l'occasion qui m'est donnée de m'adresser à ces professionnels du secteur du numérique et particulièrement aujourd'hui les experts de l'intelligence artificielle. Je tiens à exprimer toute ma gratitude et mes félicitations à mon homologue Paola pour l'invitation à nous faite. Ce sommet revêt une importance capitale, comme vous le savez. Il nous offre une opportunité de bâtir une plateforme africaine pour développer des synergies d'action. Quand j'ai écouté le discours de Donald Trump, qui parle de 500 milliards de dollars à investir dans le développement de l'intelligence artificielle, quand j'ai suivi après l'Union européenne qui parle de 200 milliards d'euros, j'ai dit à mon homologue en France qu'il nous fallait être très ambitieux dans notre approche. Et je me réjouis de ce que des succès sont enregistrés, ça et là en Afrique, notamment au Sénégal, au Rwanda, en Côte d'Ivoire, en Afrique du Sud, pour traiter des questions de santé, d'éducation et d'agriculture à partir du développement d'applications d'intelligence artificielle, notamment Caris ici et au Sénégal Awa qui développe une solution pour traduire en langue Wolof tout ce qu'on pourrait dire en français ou en anglais. Et je me réjouis de ce que ces 3 secteurs clés, l'agriculture, l'éducation, j'ai entendu dire par le docteur Kaberuka qu'en Chine, la Chine forme 1 million à 1,2 million ingénieurs chaque année. Pendant que nous, en Afrique, nous sommes à moins de 1000 souvent. Des pays comme la Tunisie ont fait de gros efforts. Ils sont à plus de 1000, d'où la nécessité de former les talents, agir sur les talents, adapter notre formation, nos modules de formation, réorienter à partir de l'intelligence artificielle les métiers qui pourraient disparaître et en faire des opportunités, surtout l'opportunité que représente la démographie africaine qui est en croissance permanente, pendant qu'elle décline dans d'autres continents. Voilà un peu, mesdames et messieurs, ce que je voudrais vous dire. et dire que je suis encore heureux d'avoir participé et de participer à ce panel. Et je me tiendrai donc à la disposition des uns et des autres si tant est que des questions pourraient m'être posées. Je vous remercie.
Some very powerful opening remarks there. Africa really needs to be able to capitalize on this opportunity to invest in its industries, its people, and leverage AI to accelerate our growth and prosperity. It is my pleasure to welcome onto the stage for an initial spotlight deep dive into InstaDeep, co-founder and CEO Karim Bouguer. He is leading an incredible AI company specializing in decision-making systems. And I guess it's no surprise to most of you in the room who probably have heard of or experienced the wonders of InstaDeep. It has grown into a global AI powerhouse. And Karim, I'll let you come on stage and speak a little bit more around how you found the journey of starting an AI business in Africa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your invitation. It's a great pleasure to see everybody meeting here in Kigali to discuss the future of the continent. And the future of the continent is AI. And so perhaps I'll share a little bit of my journey over the last 10 years. And the reason why I co-founded InstaDeep in North Africa, and we started as a bootstrap, literally like no funding, true African story, the hypothesis I wanted to test and that I was passionate about was this notion of potential. You know, in Africa, we love to talk about potential. We say, yeah, the continent has a ton of potential, the youth, etc., etc. I was like, but really, like, can we do it? And when we started, Slim and I, the idea was, could we actually build a deep tech and innovation AI startup in Africa that could be as good from a, for example, AI research point of view as the very best in the world, like Google DeepMind and others? And when I was telling this to people back in 2015, 2016, people were, like, let's say, not convinced, that we could do this. And fast forward to today, InstaDeep today is 450 talents, half of them in Africa, and we also have top teams in Europe and in the US. But that dream came true. We actually are, I believe, the only startup that co-published joint AI research papers with Google DeepMind, papers that were acclaimed by the AI research community. We got acquired by BioNTech in what became the largest exit in African tech history. And so my answer is yes. We together have incredible potential that we need to unleash on the continent. And AI, from that point of view, is a fantastic accelerator. And this is kind of like how I saw during all the experience of building the company, is always rely on innovation, always go further than people think is possible. And the answer is, you will realize, is it's actually very feasible. All what it takes is extreme conviction, let's say passion also about the topic that you're focused on, and ideally some domain expertise for the particular topic that you care about. And so if we look at the situation today, I would say things have changed, and AI has accelerated a lot. If you had asked me 5 years ago where we would be in AI today, I would have probably said, you know, like not to the point where we are today. Today, maybe this is shocking for some, but I actually believe that we will reach AGI by the end of the year, 2025. This is moving much faster than people think. And, you know, I want to emphasize this to everybody gathered here today. And so this can be an extraordinary opportunity for the continent, and I will explain how that is the case. When I built the company, we always were struggling to find the right talents. We created a system where we had collaboration between offices to bootstrap the passionate young people that we have all across the continent, in our Tunis office, in Kigali here, in Cape Town. And it was always a challenge to be able to scale quickly. Today, you can actually scale much faster. And the reason is you have these extraordinary AI agents. So this means that a small but agile, highly motivated, highly competent team in Africa doesn't require too many people. It could be like founders, a team of less than 10 employees could actually have the productivity of a team of 300, let's say, it's like a much bigger software business, etc. This is enabled by AI agents. And so from that point of view, we have an ability to scale on the continent that is much faster than anything before. If I had to redo and study today, probably I would have been able to scale the company much faster from that perspective than what we did over the last 10 years. So that's an opportunity. The second two other big opportunities that we have on the continent, I mean, the biggest one is renewable energy. Like, you know, the shortage today is not on just GPUs, it's on electricity, and ideally renewable energy. And the continent is by far the best resourced in the world when it comes to renewable energy, notably solar. That's important because there is a whole competition out there. If you can have cheap intelligence which is competitive at a cost basically that's better than anybody else, you are building the future, and this is exciting. So let me throw some numbers here. In Europe, for example, the cost per kilowatt hour is around $7 per kilowatt hour. In Africa, we could actually source that green energy, solar or renewable, at 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. This is extraordinary. This means that we could build the most competitive AI businesses in the world here in Africa. So what it takes really is sensing this potential, educating our young talents, not just on programming skills, and I totally agree with His Excellency, the Minister of Ivory Coast, who just mentioned the importance of tech education, but I would add also, adding to that, the ability to manage agents. So the future is not developers working outsourcing for a US company. The future is developers that have skills that are running a team of 10, 50, 100 agents here on the continent, building the future with access to cheap renewable energy. And so this is perhaps the message I want to convey, is that we talk a lot about AI, what it can do, and is it really an opportunity for the continent? For me, this is the most exciting time because we have the talents, but we could also have the AI agents, the renewable energy infrastructure to build up businesses that are extremely competitive and that are focused on solving Africa's pressing issues, but also the chance perhaps to build the future winners of tomorrow. And so my dream, and I'm implicated in many of those initiatives, is that in the future, there's not just InstaDeep, but there are many more InstaDeeps, much bigger successes, and that we prove this hypothesis about how far we can go. The world is moving fast, so I hope you enjoy this conference and that together we build this future that is really here for the taking. And we do not have a choice. Energy and intelligence are going to become abundant. So models on just low-cost labor or selling energy resources are not going to fly. Let's build the future together, and it's possible. You know, I've seen it happen, and hopefully we can do a lot more together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karim. I jotted down, the future isn't about having developers outsourced, but building our talent to have our own indigenous developers. A very powerful statement and a great segue into our panel discussion. I will welcome on stage our esteemed speakers, and please come in the order of me calling you out. Starting with Odys Ninyonkuru, I hope I haven't butchered that, the CEO of Digital Uganda. Natalie Jambangui, CEO of Timbuktu Foundation. Tony Dangu, founder and CEO of Tribe Nation and Katabu. Selena Lee, CEO and co-founder of Zindi. And Mike Mompi, manager of Enza Capital. Mic transitions are always interesting. Good morning, everybody. So we've had a couple of opening remarks and a spotlight. I want to share with the audience a couple of things. AfriLabs released a report mapping AI startups across Africa. Identified there are over 2,400 companies in Africa specializing in AI, of which 41% are approximately considered to be startups. However, the approximate funding that has been given out in that period, 2024, last year, was around 2 billion, of which around 63% of the African startups were in the initial phases, really early stage, pre-seed, seed rounds, and getting a small fraction of that investment. The other element of this is that much of that capital was coming from outside the continent. So this conversation is really thinking about AI in action. What are some of the success stories that we have on stage? And particularly thinking about what are some of the challenges. So those of you in the audience who are policymakers who have funding opportunities, etc., can help address some of the challenges that have been experienced, and hopefully we can spend about 30 minutes having this panel discussion. At the end, we will maybe take some audience questions. So maybe if I start with you, Natalie, I'd love you to just share a little bit about you and what makes your organization an African success story as you think about what is also the one thing around AI that can transform Africa's inclusion into the kind of global AI playground.
Fantastic, and thank you very much indeed. So Nabjabangwe is my name, CEO of Timbuktu Innovation Foundation. Prior to this, I evolved from the really third generation of the Industrial Revolution, the digital economy, where I was CEO for EcoCash, one of Africa's largest mobile money companies, for 7 years, from 2014 to 2021. And I get the opportunity, having witnessed the evolution of tech and disruption from mobile money on the African continent, become a thing and really drive economic gains on the African continent, and then to sit on a horizon of the upcoming fourth industrial revolution, leapfrogging again from a place of really a nascent market, nascent technologies, and seeing what's possible on the African continent. Today, we boast that on the African continent, there is more SIM cards and cell phones than people that actually have toothbrushes, has been the power of penetration of tech. It will be exponential in terms of AI, the quantity of computing power that a single individual will harness in their lives when we look forward 5 to 10 years from now. So we're at the cusp as humanity, as the world, at real dynamic change from technological advancement. And these cycles happen almost they were happening every 10 to 20 years. Today in humanity, these cycles are groundbreaking almost every single day. And that's what's exciting about progress. Now, fast forward to Timbuktu, which is the world's largest initiative to date on the African continent for innovation, which is $1 billion fund that's being harnessed, anchored by the United Nations Development Program, to invest in startups, to build infrastructure for startups, and to ensure that these startups become commercially viable, specifically for economic contribution on the African continent. Timbuktu is a tech-enabled fund that's running across 11 thematic verticals that ranges from fintech, smart tech, edtech, agri-tech, creative tech. There are numerous of them across 10 countries in Africa, domiciled here in Rwanda under the Kigali International Finance Center, and championed by the government of Rwanda. And to date, in just under 18 months of launching, we have in our pipeline over 140 startups across 40 countries in Africa, and our 11th vertical is an AI vertical. What Timbuktu really seeks to do is create a theory of change in the innovation ecosystem by harnessing together a multi-stakeholder platform where entrepreneurs come together, capital, policy and regulatory bodies, governments, that is, come together, and then as well as the capital. It is quite clear that if we're going to accelerate exponentially on the African continent, it's all hands on deck. We cannot achieve greater scale on the African continent, as we have noticed in Global North or some of the emerging successful Asia markets, if this quadruple solution does not galvanize together. But speaking of AI, which is why we're here today, and what I think are critical success factor conditions to enable us on the continent, and I think, InstaDip has summed it up quite well. For me, it's really, we need to create globally competitive African talent, and I think without these two things, it will be very difficult for us to achieve this $2.9 trillion opportunity coming from AI. The problem with the $2.9 trillion opportunity is that it's actually just a drop in the ocean of the global opportunity. And yet Africa is poised by 2050 and ramping up from 2035 to be the largest continent. So we have a mismatch here, right? In terms of talent capability that we could harness on the continent and the global estimate of opportunity that is existing out there. Now let's talk about talent and look at critical success factors today that have been able to deliver, well, en masse, quote unquote, on successful AI solutions and valuations or viability. China, as early as 2018, made it compulsory in universities and high schools for AI as curriculum. This year, they announced that from elementary school, it's become compulsory that children learn AI. You have to think where our policy in terms of education is placed on the African continent, because our input in terms of talent will be the output in terms of what we can generate. One of the first things, for all he could, President Trump at least announced in January in a series of geopolitical moves is that he will be putting $500 billion into the American economy and wants to see by 2026 up to 30,000 startups in AI. My question is, what is the hairy, audacious goal on the African continent about where we're going in terms of AI? And so for me, really, without talent and without an investment in electricity, Kenya may be amongst most boasts that it has 93% off-grid access to electricity. Most of our children, most of our African citizens are under candlelight still. We will need to solve very quickly for electricity, compute power, and for the harnessing of talent if we're going to treble the opportunity and double down on this opportunity for AI. And that's what, as Timbuktu, we're hoping we can play a part on.
Yeah, that deserves a round of applause.
Very good.
I may then come to you, Tony. Nat spoke very eloquently and passionately around the importance of talent. This is a space you know well. I'd love to get your thoughts on who you think should be leading in skilling African youth, right? Should it be governments? Should it be private sector? What role does academia play in this? And really, if you could wave a magic wand, what are the investment sizes needed to really get us into a place where we could think about being competitive, given how young our current population is and will continue to be going into the future?
My name is Tony Ndomo. I'm from Kenya. I have the good fortune of having to be part of what was the genesis of Kenya's the tech ecosystem. In 2009, I started something called the NILab. My friend Eric Hersman started something called the iHub. And together with our community ecosystem and our friends, we were able to build what many of you now know as Silicon Savannah. There's a lot of people who were involved. It's not just us. But what we did do was we provided a nexus point for young folks to come together and for investors like Mike and more folks to see that there is potential because there was a critical mass. to your specific question, I think it would be somewhat convoluted to think that there's one person or one sector responsible for taking Africa into the AI space. I don't think that has ever worked anywhere. What there is, though, is there's an intersection where investors come from the north. I'm not particularly using direction for any real purpose, but I'm just saying. Investors come from the north, governments come from the east, the entrepreneurs and young folks come from the west, and then the markets come from the south. We all need to find a place where we can find some form of convergence. And it is in that convergence that you find the success stories that Mike is going to talk about in one of the largest investments done in Côte d'Ivoire just yesterday. And you're going to speak to how an AI-first company has now been able to generate profits and then been able to generate an investment. And what happened? Well, there were some folks that came up with an idea very much like Karim did and decided, let's see if this will work. It's a thought experiment at some point. I think you started with $2,000, 2 laptops, and that was all Karim had when he started. And the process from Karim starting to the $680 million plus acquisition is not something he had in his mind. He worked with the assumption that there is a market, we have the skill, the government will provide policy that will enable us, the market will then show profitability, and then an investor like Mike will come and accelerate what we have done, and we'll be able to scale. So I think, to answer your question very specifically, the success stories will be based on how consolidated those 4 sectors are. And when you look at Africa, you'll see there are some countries that have perfected that, and there's some countries that have not. So that's where the gap is. The gap isn't who will be AI first and who will not. The business, because I know there will be an AI business land grab coming soon. Which companies are going to succeed and which ones are not? No, it's going to be which congregation, which nexus point adds value to everyone and which one doesn't. And I can guarantee you in the next 2 to 5 years, those countries will separate very much like oil and water, and you will know where their success stories will be and where they will not. But I want to add one small caveat. It is true, by 2050, we will have the largest young population and the largest workforce on the planet. And if you look at Europe and you look at Asia and you look at the US, they are over the hill, as we would say, in terms of age. Their economic systems do not support them, and they will not support them as they go into retirement. They will need bodies. Whether they are automated bodies or biological bodies, they will need bodies. And they only have one place to go, here. So the question then becomes, how do you leverage on that now with that forecast, very much the same way as Karim did what he did? He forecasted something. What assumptions are we building that over time will give us the revenue that we need? Because I guarantee you AI is going to do more, and I will say this again, AI will do more for Africa than it could do for any other part of the world. Because when you walk into a place and they have no shoes and you're a salesperson, do you run back to your boss and say, that's not a place for us to sell shoes? Or do you run back to your boss and say, we need to build a factory for shoes in that city? I think we are the city with no shoes, and AI is the opportunity that's in front of us.
I like it, an AI optimist. Maybe I'll bring you in here, Selena, because I think this is a nice segue into your organization as Africa's largest professional network for data scientists. I'd love to hear from you what initiatives Zindi is leading to foster AI innovation, and really how you see the investments and commitments that need to be made to create an enabling environment so that the rest of the world does look to Africa to be able to create that talent pool for the future.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Selena, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zindi. Zindi is the largest platform for data scientists, AI, and machine learning devs on the continent. We created Zindi because we recognized that there were so many amazing, young, talented people across the continent, but what they were lacking was just those opportunities, those pathways into a career space like data science and AI. So what we've created now on Zindi is a platform where young people are able to build up their skills, build up their profiles, connect with opportunities in their own markets and even around the world. And today we're so happy to announce that we have over 80,000 members of Zindi across 52 African countries. And there's been a lot of talk this week about data being the fuel for AI. And what I'd like to add to that is that we have to remember that talent is the engine that's creating the value out of that fuel. So I wanted to start with a short story, just a quick story about a young man in Kenya that I've known for years. His name is Darius, and he studied economics. He was in Kisumu, Kenya. He was working in customer support at a bank for about 5 years when he decided that he wanted to pursue a career in data science. He started taking Coursera courses, Udemy courses. He joined Moringa, if some of you are familiar with that boot camp. But he was still struggling to get his first job as a data scientist. And then he discovered Zindi. He joined the platform. He built a mental health chatbot for university students in Kenya. He developed an algorithm to predict flood extents in Malawi. And soon enough, he was making his way up the leaderboards, and he got hired as a data scientist, his first job as a data scientist at Equity Bank Kenya in Nairobi. And when I talked to him, he talked about how every day at his job in Equity, he was using the skills that he got on Zindi. So I just want to underline how important, what a missed opportunity that was, where Darius was spending years waiting for his first job as a data scientist. And Darius is just one of thousands of stories that I could tell you. And aside from that, I've mentioned some of the challenges. We've run over 300 challenges. You asked about some of the innovations. I'll highlight some of them now. But we've run over 300 challenges, and through those challenges, we've deployed over $975,000 into the hands of our members for their winning solutions. This is, in the next month, we'll probably reach over $1 million into the hands of African data scientists for the solutions that they're building to solve real-world problems. So I wanted to just take the opportunity to announce one of the collaborations that we had with this summit, and as well with the Lacuna Fund. We recently ran a challenge in partnership with them to develop an algorithm for Madagascar to geolocate renewable energy infrastructure in the country. So there's a lot of talk about the importance of renewable energy. It is absolutely critical for governments to be able to monitor and know what type of infrastructure is being built in their country. So we ran a challenge using geospatial data, satellite data, drone data, and these algorithms will help not only Madagascar, but you can imagine that these algorithms will now be important for governments across Africa and around the world. So if it's okay, I'm going to announce the top 3 winners. The number 3 team, the third team that came in this challenge, was actually Darius Mururi, who I just mentioned, along with Mohamed Tuo. That's the third place. They're from Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire. The second place winner is Ahmed Dabi from Cote d'Ivoire.
Oh.
Cote d'Ivoire is dominating the leaderboards. And then the first place team is Ayman Lassoud from Tunisia with Xijian Shen from China.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah. Okay. So these are teams that are, across the globe. And then just one last thing is that, so we closed this challenge a couple of weeks ago, and we're really happy to announce, also in partnership with the summit, we're launching a new challenge today. Actually, it's live today, in partnership with PATH, which is a nonprofit organization working in health in Africa. And this is to fine-tune open source large language models to provide antenatal health care to women across Kenya. So they've provided a data set of, it's only 400 pairs of question-answer pairs from clinicians across Kenya. And the challenge is for our data scientists in our community to fine-tune a large language model that now would be able to extend healthcare even further across the country. And same with the other challenge, what I'm really excited about is that these have implications directly for a real-world problem right here, right in Kenya, but it also has implications for the rest of the world, right? So, so I guess one of the things that I always say about Zindi is that we're a platform with African roots but global reach. But I'd also emphasize that this talent that we're building, the solutions that are being built by this talent, also has African roots but global impact. So I encourage you all to check these out. Thank you.
That definitely deserves a round of applause, and well done on the important work that you're doing. I think you segued into LLMs in the health space, and so maybe
Odis, I'll bring you in here. Your organization did some important work during the pandemic in relation to COVID-19. I'd love to hear from you, if you could share with the audience, about the solution that you and your organizations are working on and some of the successes you've achieved so far, and maybe what are some of the challenges that your organization is going through that would be good to highlight so that we can figure out how to solve for those.
Thank you, Amy. I'm Odas. I'm from Digital Umuganda. We're an AI and open data company, and we are based in Kigali and operate across 14 African countries. And I'll actually start with the challenges because it's the core reason of why we exist. I think we've talked about financing, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about talent, and also policy. But one of the major hurdles of building and deploying AI in Africa is to quality data sets in African languages, for example. So our core work is on African languages. And why it's important is, if you look at countries like Rwanda, 76% of the population is speaking in Rwanda. So if you're building solutions that only are available in English and French, you're missing about 3/4 of the population. So it's not only a challenge, but as Tony said, it's also a business case. So it's how do we build for the 76% of the population that's currently not being catered for by majority AI engines that are currently on the market. So since 2018, we started by building open source data sets and availing them to innovators and researchers working across different sectors like health, like education, like e-government services, to ensure that people have the quality data sets to build these technologies. Ever since, we've worked on 7 across the continent, including languages such as, I think you just mentioned Madagascar, so we actually just open sourced a data set for Malagasy. We've worked on Kinyarwanda, we worked on Shona. Across the continent, we've actually worked on Central, East, South, and West Africa. And basically, these were the lessons learned from some of deploying some of the technologies that we've done in the past. As I think you just mentioned COVID. So during COVID, some of the things that we saw was that information was being passed on majorly on social media, like Twitter or other social medias. So our hypothesis was, if this information can be passed on in the language that people speak in Rwanda, then people could be able to access these services. So during COVID, over 4 million people might have used our system in Rwanda, and we've since scaled it to gender-based violence, and it's actually been used by over 555,000 people. And it's against the same hypothesis that if people have access to information in the local language they speak, they'll actually get to use it. And it's one of the key challenges we're solving, not only for ourselves, we're building upon those data sets to provide information. For example, currently, we're doing a project for community workers in Rwanda, providing them LLMs in Kinyarwanda so they can be able to access and upskill using local language models that usually don't work in local African languages. I think they might work if you speak Swahili, but if you're in urban Nairobi and you speak Sheng, they might be able to respond to you. So these are the key challenges that we're trying to solve, which is how people or innovators and researchers get access to this quality data. Because organizations, from big tech companies to small startups, are facing the same issue. How do we build for Africa, and how do we get access to the critical infrastructure like data sets that are quality data sets that can allow us to build and deploy them at scale?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think ultimately one of the critical elements of the broader AI conversation is money and investment. So coming to you, Mike, I think, as I said at the outset, if the stats are accurate, 2,400 companies on the continent focused on AI, 63% are early stage, so Series B and below. And for the 54 or 55 countries on the continent, depending on how you count it, around $2 billion of investments coming in as it currently stands. In this context, for China, and that level of investments around 200 billion plus. I think India is around 25 billion. So I'd love to hear from you, the investment in African startups is clearly still in its infancy. In your day-to-day at Enza Capital, what role do you see kind of public-private collaboration playing to increase not only the funding to African startups, but also encouraging more African businesses, more African high net worth individuals, et cetera, to create that capital to invest on entrepreneurs on the continent?
Thank you very much for the question. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Mompi. I'm one of the co-founders and the managing partner at Enza Capital. And so Enza is derived from the Zulu language. It means to build, to make, and to create, which was not designed, I think, for this AI Summit. It's a name that actually kind of sits at the core of our firm, but I think it suits quite well. So we're a multi-stage venture capital firm, which means we invest in founders and teams using technology to solve large and meaningful problems from pre-seed, so idea on a piece of paper, or sometimes even before, through to Series B. They're investing about $250,000 to $5 million, our first check into these companies. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya with much of the team, but we cover the whole of the continent. And before I start kind of talking about kind of some of the public-private kind of partnership piece, I want to ensure I'm bringing in kind of examples and anecdotes of companies that are actually using AI and that are working. And I think Tony kind of set me up. He asked the question before you did, so I'm going to answer his question first. And you know, we are investors with a range of others into one of Côte d'Ivoire's kind of leading technology companies. It's called Jamo, and it's a neobank. And so what they've been able to do is they've been able to bring people into the financial system by setting up smart, cheap technology that's decreasing the cost of moving money and ultimately decreasing the cost of people who want to borrow. And it's not an AI company. It's a technology company that uses AI. And if you think about customer service, if you think about credit algorithms, so AI has existed for quite a long time. I think Tony was like in the 70s, right? I mean, perhaps it's kind of simple. It was linear. Maybe some of us have read those books, these AI books, where you choose the future, you know, which page do you turn to? And we have these kind of simple models that are now much more complex. We have gone from kind of linear to these neural kind of multi-complex systems. But really what's changed, now it's not just engineers who can engage with AI, it's everyone, right? So AI it's going to continue to exist. It's getting much more powerful, and it's going to change the way that we all kind of work in the same way that technology has changed the way that we access information. And so everyone's talked about kind of power and the potential for the continent and what this means, but also the risk that it poses. There's already a huge gap, right, that exists between many of our nations, and many of them are developed nations. And that gap, you know, without people like Kareem, who are kind of building on the continent and for the continent, and actually for the world, without people building these solutions and investors have coming back, that gap is at risk of widening. But if I think of education, for example, we're far behind on education, but we've invested in a handful of education companies. But education, now with artificial intelligence, has the power to become more adaptive, right? Which means it can become more effective. There's a study in Nigeria where students were put on computers that had adaptive kind of pathways for them to learn, and within 6 weeks, they were making the progress of 2 years for the control group. So this is a randomized control trial. And so the power to change the way that people live, work, earn, learn, and thrive is there. For health, we've invested in a company as well that is clipping kind of wearables to people, and it's taking all of the data. And this we invested 5 years ago. So this was before kind of the common person was access to kind of artificial intelligence. But rather than spending 10 days in a hospital, you can spend 1 to 2 days in a hospital and then 8 to 9 days at home, being remotely monitored. Because actually the technology can monitor you more effectively than a human, because it's looking at all of your vitals, and there's a lot of data there. We've also invested in a company that is solar-powered, autonomous, an African company. So this is an airship that self-navigates and that uses artificial intelligence to do that. And I think I'm giving some of these examples of companies because for Jamo, there are regulatory constraints that have also been opened because we have demonstrated we're a professional company that are kind of working with robust systems. AI is emerging and we're incorporating it into what we do. But we've also had the support of the government to say, yes, you have a license, yes, you are a high-quality company, and that has given us the comfort to invest more money into business. So just yesterday it was announced that they raised $17 million, which is the largest venture capital investment in Côte d'Ivoire. And I truly believe that it will be kind of one of the defining financial technology companies in Francophone Africa. And that kind of speaks to the public-private side. I think it speaks to your point as well. I think the reality is that there's been a lot that's been extracted from the continent over generations. And now we have our data, and it's data sovereignty, which is a question. Who owns that data? Where does that data sit? None of these solutions that we're talking about can exist without data. And whose data is that? Right now, it's our data. But right now, we're behind because we're putting our data onto these platforms. We're creating wrappers, and we're using some of these very powerful, very well-funded platforms to process that data and to gain insights. So the question is, are we going to be the customer and the consumer? Or are we actually going to be the owner, the builder, and the maker? And I think if you look to people like Kareem and others who are actually building in this space, that opportunity exists. I'm going to stop there because we have 10 minutes, and you said we have 10 minutes for Q&A.
No, I liked where you were going with that. I may just, okay, so let's do a thought exercise then. And I'm going off script, so apologies. If I wave a magic wand and ordain each and every one of you a minister, a digital minister, a finance minister, an energy minister, whichever title you would like, of a nation on this continent, what would be the policy change that you would want to implement to create an enabling environment
to ensure, to your closing point, Mike, that data sovereignty is maintained without compromising innovation? And I know that's a tough question, so I'm going to give you guys a minute to mull over. As I build this out a little bit more, I think we have danced around the idea of sovereignty, whether it's AI, whether it's data. Ultimately, I think we're all on the same page that AI is meaningless without data. And is it the data centers being in a country and therefore looking at it from an infrastructure lens? Is it having robust IP laws or privacy laws that then makes it very hard and can create protectionism? Or is it something else? And maybe I will start with you, Odys, because you are in this space, and give everybody else a chance to think about it. One minute, because we really don't have that much time. Roughly, what would be the policy you as the Honourable Minister would implement? There are ministers in the audience, and I think they would appreciate this.
Thanks, Elmi. So, me as the Honourable Minister, I would have a few policies, actually, only 4 policies.
4? Wow.
Only 4 policies.
Yeah, like 10 seconds.
The first one, I would incentivize Mike, so venture capital, to come in the country and invest in the talents that are there. And the second, I would work with entrepreneurs like Celine and Zindi to ensure that there's talent who are consuming these data sets that we're talking about and who are building inside the country. I would also de-risk investment for computational compute companies, so enable setting up for AWS or NVIDIA or any other cloud provider, GCP and others. And lastly, I would definitely ensure that there's open data sets for the entrepreneurs to use. So I have finance, I have compute, I have skills, and I have infrastructure.
I feel like he was ready for this question way before.
I feel like you read my mind.
I wasn't ready.
Are auditioning to be a minister, so, keep an eye. Maybe, Mike, what are your thoughts?
So I certainly don't claim to have the background for any kind of ministerial level, and I'm just going to keep this very perhaps investment focused, as opposed to kind of on the data side, which I believe will require partnership across the continent, which will require consistency across the sort of data that is being gathered, how that is being structured, which will then enable kind of more broad collaboration and access across the continent. Right now, to move money sometimes from one African country to another, you're turning it to dollars, you're sending it out of the continent and then back in. It's very expensive, and I think the same kind of risks happening with our data. But from an investment perspective, I would urge, and this is more on the finance side, and I know that budgets are already kind of very stretched, and we want to kind of increase the tax base, but I do think there is a role for individuals to play where perhaps there is a tax credit that is incentivizing direct investment into high-quality kind of teams and people that is then kind of offset against one individual's kind of tax liability. And then you have people who have kind of local context and local knowledge who are supporting, and not just foreign capital who's coming in to try to kind of support these businesses. And I think a lot of the value and a lot of the edge that we will have in this evolving kind of world of artificial intelligence and kind of how that drives technology, businesses, and information is that we are the most proximate to that data. We are the closest to the sources of that data. And therefore, we're not, but we should be in a position to own that, to control that, and to get the value from it.
I like that, the inner protectionist. Tony, over to you.
So if I was a minister, I'd do a really good job and campaign to be the president. Because it wasn't one happy. Because I think the value proposition would be across the board. I think the value would be, if I was to come up with a policy, it would be insisting on every ministry in my government to incorporate artificial intelligence. Because if you take an example of education. Oh, did I get it? Oh, okay, I see. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will ask you to vote. No, the value, so if you think about the value proposition is actually quite interesting, because just think about the amount of money your country spends on, whether it's education, agriculture, security, national security, social fund, anything you think of, the amount of money that's spent is consummate to the amount of data you have on the issue that you're dealing with. That is an almost proportionate transfer. If we have X number of teachers and students, then we have X number of shillings or dollars or rupees or whatever it is you want to do as a nation to move to that issue. Imagine if, as Mike put really well, we had more succinct real-time data. So I would insist on the Ministry of Agriculture using whatever data tools they have to understand what fertilizer inputs do we need where. A very good example is Bridges for Prosperity, and they've done this in Rwanda, where they figured out where the bridges that need, the rivers that need bridges to be built are. They mapped it out and they found out that 60% of the rivers in Rwanda do not have the bridges that they need to get people to move from one place to another. That's a very practical example. And now they've mapped out all of Africa. Think about that. They've mapped out all of Africa. So being able to do that as a small company that most of you don't even know with less than 100 people goes to show how much power that would impact in our continent. And this is why you should vote for, I'm just, it sounded really, it's really coming out well, but that's kind of, but that's kind of where I would go with it.
No, I like that. The takeaways for me were, we need AI in every ministry, and to get that to be meaningful and valuable, you need to digitize the data that already exists, probably in paper form, in an archive somewhere in a ministerial department. Selina, Honourable Minister, what would be your policy?
So the way that I've been, and especially after these last couple of days, the way that I'm thinking about the opportunity and the challenge is this virtuous cycle between data, talent, and compute. Data, talent, and compute, and it's funded and fueled by funding, by actual capital that's getting invested in creating the demand, creating the possibilities here. But there's this talk about data sovereignty, and you can do data sovereignty all you want, but it won't turn into AI sovereignty unless you actually have the talent within your borders to create the value and the solutions that you need. So I think that Nat had mentioned, and that struck a chord with me, is that, and I lived in South Africa for so many years, that there's this huge opportunity, this missed opportunity to get people when they're young, introduce coding at a young age. So I guess it's just across the board, thinking about skills in a very critical way so that we can feed this virtuous cycle.
Last but not least.
Thank you. Well, I'd have to answer the question first, right? So I would totally love to be Minister of Shared Prosperity and Enabling Environment. And for me, what that really means is educate the youth for future skills, which should translate to jobs and future economic developing companies. And then secondly, key focus for me would be policy reform and investments that are required for future growth. But I really do think that with the UNDP and Timbuktu, we're busy setting up that ministry, so we've got our work cut out for us.
And that is it. I want to use this opportunity to thank our distinguished speakers, Your Excellency Kareem, for kicking us off into a really robust discussion around African success stories. The panelists for entertaining my thought experiment. I see some future policymakers on stage. It has been a pleasure. I am always an AI optimist. I think it is not just the future, it is the now. And I think just by the mere fact that we are here talking about AI in Africa, in Africa, is already a significant milestone. So I look forward to continuing this conversation with each and every one of you. Thank you to the speakers today.
That was fantastic.
Very good.
Well, thank you for moderating.